Sick. All right. Welcome back to the podcast. Glad to chat with you
Be back.
again.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So I
Um,
think last time we chatted, you mentioned Serum 2 was in the making, but now Serum 2 is done. How do you feel about it, and when's it releasing?
if it was done, it would be out, I guess. So,
True.
it's exciting to have something that's manifested rather than just being like an idea or some little bits and pieces. So, that's really exciting. The feedback on it has been really exciting as well. It was kind of more or less what I was hoping that certain people would appreciate certain things that we've done. So when is it out is dependent on kind of everyone feeling like it's ready to be out. It's a little nuanced of a situation, but I'm not following a timetable or feeling beholden to some schedule like most companies often sort of need to. And I want to make sure that we have something that is built to last in a sense, that it's something that we have the sound engine that we're really happy with, where we're not later regretting things that we sort of rushed on. So there's a lot of subtleties when it comes to stuff like modulation's a great example, right? So you can have modulations where you say, take an LFO and modulate the point of another LFO, and then that graph might be modulating the rate of the first LFO or crazy things like that you can get into. And then you're like, okay, well, that's cool, that works. But then what if I use velocity or something to scale? And then you realize, oh, it's not actually doing what I was thinking polyphonically,
Mm.
because the LFO graph is like a singular graph, but now you need it to be sort of polyphonic, right? So we're working on these sort of edge cases to make sure that like everything is sort of future proofed. So long and short of it is a few more weeks, I think, is what we need to make sure that we've made the right decisions on all of those little like edge cases. So yeah, it's exciting. It's getting really close. But the last thing I want to have to do is break things once the software's out, which you really, of course, try to avoid because you don't want to change people's song projects on them.
Yeah, is the issue with that once thousands of people have it installed, there's just certain things that you can't change or all just like kind of have to be a completely, for lack of a, I mean, it's basically has to be a new plugin rather than an update.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, basically, yes. This is exactly the concern, is that once it's out there, now you need to support exactly what that's doing. I mean, a serious developer would require a bit compatible output at all times in the future, right? So it's like if I release this, all times in the future, it needs to be bit compatible. I cheated a couple times in Serum, and I don't feel great about it, but there was a couple things I just kind of had to do. So I modified how things would sound, but they were like pretty subtle, like a DC blocker. So like, yeah, if you are really exploiting sub 20 hertz, you might notice a sound change now, but that's kind of super edge casey stuff. And it was like, well, for the greater good, let's do it now. And that was 7 or 8 years ago. So those are the kinds of things I'm like, oh yeah, I'm glad I did that, even though I'd really rather not. What you otherwise have to do is you have to provide basically two circuits, right? So you have to have the old way that you did it, and then the new fixed or improved way. So Ableton Live has done this a bunch, where they've updated their EQ algorithms or their filters or whatever it is, but they can't break people's song projects. So they need to provide the legacy DSP of how the bad version of the EQ also, just in case someone was, exploiting the aliasing or something. So they hide the legacy modes. Like you can right click on the title bar of the EQ plugin or whatever and say legacy, and you get the legacy cheap filters or whatever. And I think at this point they might have even removed those options because they just don't even really want people using that. I'm not sure. I haven't looked in a while. But yeah, that's essentially what you have to do, is provide this legacy DSP path and then this new path. And then there's potentially a cost of doing that, right? Because with the codes executing, it might be having to hit a switch of which way do I go? Am I using the legacy DSP or not? And hopefully you could build things in a way you wouldn't have to do that. But long story short, yeah, there's all these potential places where you'd want to make tweaks to the sound, but you've got to do those now. Now is the time, and that's what we've been doing the last year. It's part of the reason things take so long is with an instrument of this degree, I think is really trying to put some crafting into those subtleties so that we don't have zippery audio here or there or whatever the issues might be that then later, yeah, it's tough to fix. Even if you consider it an improvement, you might have ruined someone's exploitation of that thing.
Right. Yeah. What is bit compatible? You mentioned things have to be bit compatible.
Yeah, that would just mean like a null test passing output, right? Like bit compatible would mean like you're a one-to-one output with how it used to be and how it is now. They're going to be the
I
exact
see.
same bit stream. Yeah.
Gotcha. What would you say across all the plugins that you've ever built? You've built like 10 or 20 or maybe even more that I don't know about, but like across all the plugins that you've made, what is the single most head scratching DSP or coding problem that you've had to solve?
Oh, I mean, there's unsolvables in my opinion, right? Like there's certain things that you just can't, like conceptually you think like, oh, that I could imagine that, but then in reality, you really just kind of can't do it. So a good example would be with wavetable importing, right? Like you have a sound of a brass stab or whatever it is, and you think you can imagine it as a wavetable. And to be fair, my import algorithms aren't the best, and there is room for improvement. But when you start going down the rabbit hole, you start realizing that there's just no way to have this complex sound become periodic, right? It's just they're fundamentally different things. So you could create a wavetable set which will play back that sample, but you're going to need to play back that exactly one-to-one, obviously, right? Or else if there's any sort of looping that's having to take place, now you've broken any sort of like phase information, for instance, that was like contiguous, that was underlying, like, you know, a chorus of brass horns playing are not going to be singular frames at any point. So you're really unable to take that and put that into a wavetable, even though and it makes logical sense once you think about it. But those sorts of tasks can be very frustrating when you get into the programming, because you start realizing that you don't know exactly what it is that you're after, right? And if you don't have a set objective, then you're kind of doomed, right? Because programming ultimately is merely telling the computer what you want it to do very explicitly. So if you don't know what it is you want it to do, then yeah, it can be challenging.
Right. What was the biggest like head scratching DSP problem when making Serum 2 specifically?
I mean, there's similar stuff where you start thinking about like you don't know how you want it to necessarily behave. You have to start kind of thinking about um I mean, there's certain latency issues that can be kind of frustrating, right? Because so for instance, if you have a compressor, unless you want a really lousy compressor, the compressor needs some look ahead. So it needs to be able to see the audio ahead of time in order to measure its loudness. And so if you do that in a DAW with latency compensation, the DAW kind of takes care of it for you. It sends the audio to the compressor ahead of time for you, and you hear it bang on the beat, and that's great. But for a playable synthesizer, you're not able to really work in that manner, right? It can't send especially with internal latencies, right? And now with Serum 2, you have the multiple effects buses, so you can have a variable latency on different buses. And so while it wasn't I who had to solve all that, there's a lot of head scratching that takes place once you start getting into latencies and modulations, right, and stuff like that, where it's the same stuff that DAWs have to deal with, and Ableton Live, bless their heart, still doesn't deal with correctly, right, with like LFO Tool or these tempo syncing plugins. It's not compensating the timing position information when you have latency in your audio chain. And so those are the sorts of things that we want to have correct internally inside of Serum 2, and we do. But so that's the stuff I think that gets a little head scratchy, especially when you consider that audio components can be modulation sources now. So you have a definitely sort of a circular potential for impossibilities or paradoxes when it comes to latencies, and having to deal with that is ugly stuff. Because also I've wanted Serum to be as playable as possible. And with Serum 1, I tried to make latency kind of zero, although I had to have some for the limiter and The distortion technically has to have some for the oversampling, but I really wanted it to be playable. Here, a technical one. I mean, you should talk to Dave Gamble when it comes to technical stuff. I think I'm going to be boring to the really nerdy people and not that interesting to anyone who isn't talking about the stuff. So Dave would be much better, but he had to solve some pretty challenging things as well with respect to similar stuff, buffers and latency, the spectral oscillator. And yeah, he'd be a good guy to talk to for that stuff.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him. I love his plugins. The DMG audio stuff is like second to none when it comes to mixing and mastering. It's like the quality of those plugins is insane. But yeah, like the latency thing I've definitely noticed in Ableton, specifically with auto pan, when you like align the phases to turn it into like kind of a tremolo type thing, the phase at which it has to be is very dependent on all of the plugins before it. I've noticed if you have it right at the start of the chain.
So funny. I did not know that they suffered from it inside their plugins.
Yeah, AutoPan has this issue. If you put it directly on a channel that has no other plugins on it, 270 degrees phase seems to be like correct with the tempo. But if you have it after, like, let's say Serum effects and like, you know, some other plugins or you know, stuff that's introducing latency, and you have it like as the 10th device in the chain, then you kind of just have to earball that phase. Sometimes it's 0, sometimes it's 180, sometimes it's 360. Like, it doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yeah, that's funny that they suffer from it as well. I figured it was just their VST implementation and not just their internal timing info as well. So I don't know if that's good news or bad news when it comes to ever seeing a solve. I think they're investigating it again, which is nice. But anyway, probably shouldn't say that.
What is it about like DAW design that gives you specifically these issues as a plugin developer to try and get the latency spot on?
I mean, for the most part, the DAWs do their job correctly, right? You have you have it. It's really the plugins in control in the sense of dictating the latency. It's just reporting it to the DAW and saying, "Well, I need the audio this much early." Essentially, is what it's saying, right? And then the DAW has to do the potentially messy stuff of lining up the timing of MIDI and audio and the time position information. And some hosts do it really well, some not so well. But Ableton Live's pretty much at one time or another, they've all suffered from this, and most have come out with updates to fix it. And Ableton's just a little behind on the offsetting the time position information based on your latency. And it would raise CPU for them to do that. But if they implement it globally and cleverly, it probably shouldn't be too much at all. As it's a per block kind of reporting. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forget the original question.
It wasn't really a question. I just mentioned that the auto pan thing has some latency.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I got to mention that to them because they were hitting me up for LFO tool NFRs, and I'm like, well, you really could use the demo, and yeah, no, that's funny. They could use their own plugin.
Right. No, the question, sorry, was I think you answered it, which is what is it about DAWs that you have to navigate as a plugin developer to make sure the latency is correct? And I think you mentioned it. Basically, you're just telling the DAW the thing needs to be, I need to hear the audio this much early. Basically, it's like just.
Yeah, like the majority of plugins, the vast majority of plugins don't do any sort of tempo sync, right? Like they might have a delay with a tempo button, but that's very different, right? Because that's just looking at the tempo information and calculating a number of samples or milliseconds, right? Based off of that tempo info. But to do an actual synchronization, AutoPan does it, LFO tool does it, and then there's a handful other of LFO tool like plugins that do that same kind of tempo synced graph thing. But for the most part, you don't see a lot of that. And for that reason, this issue gets a little bit overlooked or back burner, or it's something that the programmers of DAWs don't want to deal with when they're doing the plugin implementation, right? Because you have a call in VST, for instance, like get time info, right? You're gonna ask the DAW. You're the plugin. You're asking the DAW, give me your timing information. Tell me where we are right now in the song. And then the DAW returns that. And now if you think you're a DAW developer, you'd go, oh, okay, well, I'll just have this one variable in memory, which is our current position in the song. And anytime a plugin asks, I'll just give them that memory address. I'll say, here you go, here's the value. But now if you have latency, you can't do that. Now you have to individually cater to any plugin asking. You have to say, oh, where are we? Oh, you mean where are you? And now I need to figure out where you are based on your cumulative latency. And okay, so here's actually where you are. And so I think so for the DAWs, it could be, it really should be a couple multiplies. It's like not really a lot of information that needs to happen. And like I sort of mumbled, it only has to happen once per buffer. So it's not something that's happening like every sample. Nonetheless, yeah, it kind of gets overlooked. And so most plugin developers, I guess my point is most plugin developers never have to even deal with this because they're just reporting their latency. The DAW compensates latency, and then this timing info issue is not even relevant to them.
How is it in the VST development world that you get those memory addresses? Because I know one way to get the tempo information, which is a super dumb way to do it, is to gzip the ALS in memory and then unzip it, which produces an XML. And then there's this giant XML structure where you can get like any piece of information you want. Like you can get the tempo you want that way. But I assume
that's
Serum
wild. I mean, Xfer Live gives you access to that, right? But I guess you don't want that. But yeah, with VST SDK, you get there's a data structure called VST time info, and there's a get time info from the host. So you're just passing the host. You're passing the host a memory address, which is your data structure of the timing information, and you say, "Fill this, please." It's kind of like you're submitting an application to the host and go, "Here, please fill out this information." And so, yeah, that's it's built into the SDK in terms of that getting. And so that gives you like sample position. So in other words, like where are we in the song running from bar 1, beat 1, which we'd call sample 0. So that's called sample pause. And that's really nice to have your exactly how many samples in are we. And then you have a bar in beats position. And the bar in beats position is PPQ pause, it's called. And it's just, it's really just a floating point of how many beats are we in the song. So bar 2 would be, beat 4 or whatever.
Is that measured in ticks, which are quarter notes, or is
it's measured in floating point beats? So it would be like, bar 1 would be 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, and then bar 2 would be 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you have a decimal place that's giving you your subdivision of that beat. And so, of course, it's easy to scale that to whatever you want. And then you also have a tempo info, so you can say, what is our tempo right now? And it'll tell you 120.4 or whatever your tempo is. But what you don't really have is a way to actually have a clue what the hell is going on in a certain sense, which is like you don't know anything about like automation of tempo. So you don't know from sample pause, you don't really know where you are in the song from sample pause. You can't guarantee that the tempo hasn't changed. So the only way you really know where you are is with the PPQ pause, but the PPQ pause isn't really sample accurate. I mean, it basically is, but it's PPQ. So it's a little annoying overall. And what some developers do, kind of the best way when you're dealing with your own sequencing is to just have your own internal clock. So rather than trying to like lock constantly to the host, you just let yourself run. You make your own assumptions. You know how much time is in a sample, and you let yourself run. And then you just compare to the DAW, like sample pause and beat pause. And if something seems out of threshold by more than 1 or 2 samples or something, then you can resync. But that tends to yield the best results, because otherwise you get into all of these crazy little weird edge cases where like one of the big frustrating parts is that samples, which you think of as very small, right? Like when you're kind of approaching this stuff, and I still do kind of naively, you think of a sample being such a small unit of time. You think of it like an atom. You think of it as like indivisible. And so then you start to lean on like sample accurate as being good enough. but sample accurate's not really always good enough. And a great example would be how many samples are in a 16th note at a certain tempo, right? And it's going to be a fractional number. And if you discard that fraction, you're going to hear it.
Yeah, for those listening who maybe aren't producers, a sample is basically if you break 1 second up into 44,100 parts, that's each one of those parts is a sample. That's correct, right? If you're working at a sample rate of
That's right.
44, okay.
Yeah,
Which
there's
is
a lot of
and
annoying
which is
terms.
an insanely small amount of time, and you're saying that that sometimes is not enough.
Yeah, 1/44,000th of a second isn't enough when you start applying math, especially, right? So if you say how many samples are in a quarter note at 44.1, even that stuff starts getting really fractional, and you start seeing, oh, that's like, 5 whatever. You start seeing 0.5s, and things start happening. And so if you discard that and you say, and so different DAWs deal with this issue differently. Back in the day when I worked at Avid, Pro Tools basically didn't deal with this. So like if you set your tempo to 121 in Pro Tools, it rounded that. It said, oh, that's that many samples. So now if you selected a region that's a bar and you duplicated it, you're actually going to drift off of that true tempo because you're not actually at that tempo. You're at the closest number of samples of that tempo. So 121 BPM might become 121.03. And then that started causing problems for like guys doing symphonic cues and stuff like that, where their music was not where it was supposed to land. And they're like, what the hell? And it's like, oh, fractional rounding of samples turns out to be an issue when you start, adding things up. So really boring conversation, by the way. But yeah, it's the kind
I
of stuff
like it.
that you don't think of when you're approaching this stuff, starting out. And the more and more I get into this stuff, the more, I really had a punk rock kind of rock and roll attitude or whatever, like close enough, good enough. That was always my mindset, just because I would have failed. I would have gotten nowhere if I was always trying to do everything as good as possible. But now I'm starting to really appreciate being methodical, understanding concepts, and have bits of regret about my haphazard journey. Although I of course don't as well.
It seems like it worked for you. I mean, like now
Yeah.
you've got Serum too, which is one of the best synths I think I've ever used. You,
Thank you. Yeah, I found the right guys, right? I'm Dave Gamble, like you mentioned, and then like the unsung heroes of the rest of the team as well. Like, I mean, all of the group, all five of them were just absolutely phenomenal. So having Lance again on the UI, irreplaceable, and then having Ollie step up, and Ollie is such the surprise to me, because when we started working, he's like, oh, so I have this junior developer. He actually used to produce Electro House. And then I just had this image in my head, because I was in the Electro House world, of just this like, party animal guy, whatever. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, I used to go by Far Too Loud. And I was like,
oh yeah, he's
holy,
awesome.
I remember Far Too Loud, because like when Joel and I were doing BSOD, like that was one of the names that was also on the Beatport Top 100 all the time. And his stuff was always really like good, like complextro-y, and like just really had a lot of this sort of a scary amount of production excellence to it. I just always remembered that. And I was like, oh, that guy, oh, crazy. Like, how weird that he wants to get into VSTs and programming. But it turns out Ollie is like so gifted, like such a good programmer. And so he's been really a surprise to me, because I thought that I didn't know what to expect, but it turns out like he is a lot like me, in the sense of having that musical mind, and him being able to bring that to the table. There's definitely a chunk of his soul in Serum too, and especially in the granular oscillator, which he saved more or less. I think we had a prototype that just wasn't that exciting, and he really dug into it and made the way it works, I think, really clever and intuitive as well.
Mm. You've spoken about avoiding option anxiety. How do you decide when a feature is too complex or too advanced to include by default? And when do you think it's worth burying something in a submenu or in an advanced tab or something like that? What's kind of like your philosophy on that?
Yeah, this is one of the hardest things. And this is actually what I largely got relegated to on this project in a sense. I mean, I drove Dave and the group a little bit mad, probably with iterative design. And we had our sort of milestones, and we started by just rebuilding Serum 1 in entirety, which is madness. But until recently, there was a button you could hit and flip Serum 2 into Serum 1. It would just look like Serum 1. Um, anyway, the feature stuff is where I really started to focus in on, and then with Damon from Odd Sound, Damon and I would spend a lot of time deliberating. Um, there's um, there's a real problem for me using synths that have a lot of clutter, and I just really try to avoid having too much clutter. At the same time, I feel like you want to get stuff immediate and thrown on the screen. I hate when I feel like stuff's hidden away in submenus on stuff, and so I want stuff to be like accessible. And then with something as complicated as Serum, like we just ran out of space kind of on the screen. I just went towards. I'm not happy with how it turned out completely, but there's just a lot of because it's also a work in progress, I should say. Like I think Serum 2.1 is going to be awesome as well. Like there is stuff for information display and stuff that we'll get to that will make things better. But yeah, there is a lot of power features on right-click menus, and I have mixed feelings about that. I love that the interface itself stays pretty like simple, and like the most important controls are right up in your face. And I have mixed feelings about the hiding stuff away, because part of me is like, well, it's kind of cool for power users to know where the power stuff is, and maybe they'll get a little endorphins like opening those power features. But I also don't like the thought of people missing them. And there's a lot of important things, like on this spectral oscillator having transients mode on or off. Like it's a pretty important, pretty big part of how it's going to end up sounding. And
Right, or like clean mode on the filter, for example.
or clean mode on the filter. And the case could be made that this stuff should be front and center. I should be able to see if this is on or off. And I don't disagree. But then you have to weigh that against just the amount of visual information and how much clutter starts adding up. So I fought tooth and nail. One thing that Damon really wanted on the UI was the MIDI out, because if you're using the sequencer, you can MIDI out to other instances. And he kept trying to get Lance to add that onto the main bar there, so you just at all times. And I was like, no, you can't. I cannot stare at MIDI out on a synthesizer, where like that's not one of the primary features. So this isn't something that people's eyes should have to look at all the time. It should not be on the main panel. And I eventually won on that after being very stubborn about it. But now you have to be on the sequencer tab to enable MIDI out. But that's where it belongs in my mind. But these are these things where, like, yeah, I have fought hard for the interface to stay feeling not too cluttered. But I do have mixed feelings about some of those things. And clean mode's a great example. Transients mode, a great example. Some of these things are definitely on the fence, and the case could be made that they really should be like visible buttons.
Well, I think you did a good job of it. I think Serum 2 stays true to Serum 1. When I first opened it, I wasn't completely confused about where things were, but also speaking to you and you telling me, yeah, hey, you can turn clean mode on in the filter. Like I had no idea that was there, and I had made already like 100 presets in the thing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a problem there. I mean, the great thing I think with the modern times is people making little tips and tricks videos. I think that Serum 2 hopefully will be a goldmine for like short form content, because I think there's so many things that can be like demonstrated and shown off really quickly, that I know that's a way that a lot of people consume media these days too. So I'm hoping that there's a good overlap there, where a few guys will jump on that and be like, hey, I'm going to make a little short showing clean mode and let people hear it. And yeah, the clean mode makes a huge difference on like the VA filters, especially all the ones under the new section. You can really notice their response is different when they're being driven hard versus quiet.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Serum 1 was this way too, where Like, for example, I'd been using Serum 1 for fuck, like 10 years or something before I saw a short video where someone was like, yeah, if you just alt click and like drag through the oscillator, it creates this rainbow and then you can just stretch the the LFO shape. I was like, what the, when did that get added?
Yeah, that's a weird leftover feature that I think I did that in LFO tool, just like relative strength selection. There's these things that came about. I was just watching Joel use like Touch Designer and these 3D. There's so many pretty amazing apps out there, right? Like Blender and stuff with Touch Designers. I mean, its interface isn't to die for, but it's always really interesting to see non-music apps and how they deal with representing information and manipulating it and stuff like that. And I feel like some of the video software and stuff's probably gotten ahead of the audio software in terms of like the tools for manipulating this kind of stuff. Bitwig has some nice ones, with the velocity kind of heuristics and stuff, but I don't know. Making the tools, it's definitely a pain. I mean, it's like you think of these features that you want, and then you realize that just to access that feature needs to go somewhere, and then that's going to add some clutter, and it lowers the motivation to make the feature in the first place because you're like, God, I'm just making this thing messier by adding power, and but you're like, nope, they want the power. And so, yeah, it's a really tough thing. One thing I'm looking forward to, I'll divulge for the future, hopefully, is a unified oscillator view, like a singular oscillator view. So like if you really just want to look at your oscillator A, B, or C and just have a larger waveform and then get all of these hidden features all displayed out, right? So you won't be tabbing in the granular as much and stuff like that, just to get everything visible at once. So I'm looking forward to that. That's something we really wanted to get in 2.0, but just had to get deferred. But those sorts of things, I think, are another. The alternate UI stuff is potentially really exciting. The way that Serum 2's UI framework is built is that it's very like modular and extendable and stuff. And in theory, you could make a bank of analog synth presets and have the whole Serum skin turn into like an analog synth. So we'll see if we'll ever get to that place, and that's sort of a novelty. So I'm not sure I'll ever do that, but we're hoping to get to that point in the future where like skin designers and stuff will have like a whole hell of a lot of power, which would be fun.
Do you ever think when you're designing an interface that this could be so much more efficient and simpler to use and more streamlined and just like makes way more sense, but I can't do it because it's not going to be familiar to anybody? And like, I feel like since the interfaces of synths have been kind of the same for, last 15 years, 20 years, whatever, it's kind of like, you've got your oscillators in one area, your filters in one area, your LFOs in one area, kind of everything's like separated out. And then when you look at some programs like maybe Touch Designer or other program, like the way that they sort of have their interfaces set up is like often very different. And I don't know, I just wonder, like, is there a better way to do stuff that we're not doing because nobody has done it yet and no one's familiar with it, and so nobody has gotten used to it yet? It's kind of like the question of like, is the mouse and the keyboard the best way to control a computer, or is there a better way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that I've deliberately made choices with Serum that were based partly around the psychology of users, and I think that I I don't go too far into imagination land with users. I really do use myself as a user for the bulk of that imagining. So I really do sort of trust what I would be drawn to. I do have experience in the past with Max MSP and Reactor as tools that I say would be node-based systems that you can build kind of whatever sort of patch, and PD as well, whatever sort of patch you can imagine to some degree, right? And so if I want 22 oscillators and I want running into 14 filters and like whatever you really want to try to do, you can kind of do in those setups. But the challenge or the problem is that then you're dealing with these very dynamic systems. So going from one preset to another is such a paradigm shift that you have to learn the signal flow over again. There's nothing to like grasp onto that sort of stays consistent across it all. And so for me with Serum and this idea is to lay out the very basic framework that then you can go a whole bunch of different creative angles with. But if you're a user of it, hopefully I could load any Serum preset, and without too much time, I can figure out really what's going on because of the limitations in the signal flow. It does become a bit of a strength. And so the design of the synth becomes essentially the limitations, you can say, but it becomes what are the requirements, right? What are the parameters? What is the range of parameters that we're going to give people to work within, and calling that a space, and thus a synth is kind of the way I look at it. Stuff like Reactor, Max MSP is not appealing to me as a primary platform. Reactor got like kind of close. Like there was a time in like 2003 or 2002 where the user library was pretty alive and well, and there was just all these cool instruments appearing, and it started to feel like, man, I could make just techno records with Reactor and nothing else. And then it just kind of fell off. Their VST implementation was always a little unfortunate, and myself and many others lost work by not saving the internal snapshots when you go to save your project, and then it loses your data. Things, there was a few things like that just drove people away from it, I think, unfortunately. But I've really felt like you want that some sort of motor memory. You want sort of like what makes a QWERTY keyboard great is that you know where the W key is without having to look down. And so with Serum, there's a bit of that same concept, is you kind of want to know where things are without having to analyze too much. And I think that's terribly important, like really important when it comes to staying in the creative headspace. And I think that's what makes this software different than slightly more technical softwares in a sense, is that the context of Serum getting used is a musical one. I mean, to be fair, yes, there is sound designers that sit there 8 hours a day just making Serum presets, but my interest and mindset is a little towards people sitting there with the DAW open, and they want to either tweak a sound a little or they have a little idea in their head for a sound, and they want it to come out of the speakers. And like my dream/goal is to make something that is has enough power that people feel like they're getting what they imagine out of the speakers, but has the friendliness that you don't feel that you have to decode what you see with your eyes, taking you out of the headspace of the sound that you're trying to make. And I feel like if what you're looking at on the screen requires this complete deconstruction of signal flow, et cetera, for me at least, I start losing my creative flow.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's important to have both. Sometimes it's fun to just get down in the weeds and make a bunch of crazy shit in node-based patching software or even coding. But one thing I've really started to enjoy in, I guess you could call them a synth, maybe call it a DAW, is like in trackers, how every single step can be like a whole different sort of state. So like one step of a track, like let's say you have a 16-step tracker sequence. Like step one could be instrument one, effect one, note D3, and then maybe like another effect or something. And then step two could be a completely different instrument, completely different effects, different MIDI note, and a different modulator. And then step three is like completely different again. And that just has a certain sound to it. Like it sounds kind of like Aphex Twin or something. And I feel like people often try to do a similar thing in electronic music these days with like hocketing between a lot of sounds quickly. But I just feel like the way that trackers do it is a more efficient way to achieve that sound. But I don't think we see that much in plugin design. Why do you think that is? And do you agree that it's kind of an efficient way to do that, or do you think there's better ways to do that?
Hmm. I guess there's been a challenge with note expression in DAWs, and I think that like I can't help but look at the history for understanding like how did we get here, like why are we where we are, and the history runs right through MIDI, right? And so I think MIDI's worth um, discussing. Yay, so exciting! Let's talk about MIDI. When analog synthesizers were the thing, and then keyboard players were playing on stage, they would often bring multiple synthesizers, and this is obviously a silly summary, but for anyone interested in sort of the origins of MIDI, that's how it started. Was just a way that like a keyboard player could play his hand on the keyboard and have the sound like he was playing it on two keyboards at once. It was really just to like fatten up sounds. And so it was built with stage in mind and for layering, and then it was like, oh wait, if we are sending this digital note information, we could capture that, and then we could like play it back, and you could like fix your mistakes and quantize and stuff. And so sequencers of that sort, the MIDI era sequencers, were born as an afterthought. And you were dealt with the hand that MIDI dealt, which was, a very under-spec'd specification in a certain sense, one that's close to my heart and I love it, but it's like super simple, right? You have 3 bytes of data for every note. And when you think about expression, like 3 bytes is not a lot. And especially once you start looking about how those bytes are reserved, you don't even really get a lot of expression when it comes down to it, right? You get a note number, and then you get a channel from 1 to 16, and then you get a velocity from 1 to 127. So almost 7 bits of velocity, or 7 bits of velocity. So it's not almost. So it's not a lot to go with. And MPE came along, and MPE is the MIDI polyphonic expression, and the MPE is great for extending what a note can be, right? So no longer are we just a velocity, but now there always was aftertouch messages and stuff, but now we have a sort of this protocol that allows us to really get those messages happening on multiple notes at once, multiple fingers at once. And the MPE, was an afterthought to MIDI and was an afterthought to the DAW. So everything's been approached from we got to support the basic MIDI, and then, we got to support the MPE add-ons. But nothing's really been developed since the advent of MPE, more or less. I mean, Bitwig was kind of rose up with MPE in mind a bit, but we're not over that. We're not over that, the pains of that history and that legacy, right? I'm sure you deal with it, and every producer does a bit, MPE on or off on this thing, and it's causing some problem with pitch bend or who knows what. So, unfortunately, I think there's as people try to make things progress along, you also end up with a bit of this accumulated mess. Serum tries to, unfortunately, in a certain sense, Serum, I mean, it has to play the same game, right? We have note expression stuff. Steinberg decided that, and maybe wisely, I don't know, maybe they're onto something here, but Steinberg decided that MIDI has no place in plugins. Wait, what? MIDI has no place in plugins. Are you crazy, Steinberg? MIDI is like the studio is digital music, electronic music. What? I thought they were crazy when they first told me this. Like they basically they're trying to separate MIDI out of audio plugins. And they're like, well, and they approached it, I guess, a little philosophically, right? Like, well, why? Why would you have MIDI? MIDI is this thing. What are you trying to do? Oh, you're trying to do note expressions. Okay, well, let's make a thing called note expressions. And the downside of all this is the lack of standards or the competing standards. And now we have all these, now we have VST3 note expression, and we have MPE that we have to support, and so things get a little ugly for developers. Things get a little ugly for musicians, and I don't really know, where things are going completely. And I think the answer is fractured. There's going to be different lanes of music creation from AI auto creation, down to new methods like you're kind of hinting at, like just new DAWs that just ignore all this past issue and start again. And that's something I'm considering. I'm sort of thinking about getting into the music creation platform space, because I think that is something that needs a new take.
Yeah, I would agree. So if there's one thing that you could change about DAW design as a whole, what would it be? And also, like, if you could redesign something like MIDI from the ground up, like, how would you make it work so that it was the most useful thing possible for somebody trying to make music that sounds cool?
Yeah, I mean, they've continued to make a mess with MIDI too, and so I don't know if how hypothetical that should be versus just like what would I do if I had if I was put in charge of everything, which the answer is I have no idea. I don't really know how you deal with the mess that's out there at this point, but stuff like open sound control to me seems like the best way. You want to drill down into as much standard as possible. I really like the idea of, and we need to see more of this in the music technology space, of like people getting along and making open standards. And so like NKS is a great example, right? With the Native Instruments controllers, they, will have their like knobs with LCD scribble strips, and then you have that same kind of thing on like push controllers, right? But not all of this stuff is speaking a common protocol. So if you're a plugin developer, in the case of the Native Instruments one, you have to support their specific NKS thing. But if you do that, then, well, who's to say Akai is not going to come along next month and have their own standard that they also want you to support? And so it's like, come on, Native Instruments, you should just open this up to all hardware manufacturers. Yes, I understand they're your competition, but like, let the software developers and the users be able to read the settings on their knobs. Like why? Like let's have a better society, right? And so that's kind of my take is like people have to get over this whole like safeguarding technology stuff. And it's the same reason that I did with the Serum wavetable format, just made it open, in the sense of like I knew that other synths would come along and would be loading my wavetables, and I didn't care. I didn't think the factory wavetables were that amazing, and B, more like I thought of it from the musician's point of view. More power to him. Let him have multiple synths that he can use these sounds in. That's great. That's not a problem. And then so I've gone equally, along that same lines with Serum 2, with multi-samples being with the SFZ file format, and that allows us to, allows users to be able to use these sounds in other software if they should want, and vice versa, make sounds for Serum using other software. So everyone's a winner when it comes to doing things more openly, I think, when it comes to this stuff. So that's my main thoughts. When it comes back to your question about like the DAW and what you do different, I see it a little bit stratified. Like I was saying, I think that there's just different, there's different use cases for a DAW, you could say, or different user mindsets. And then there's different proficiency levels as well. And I think that the DAW right now is a one size fits all, right? It's too complicated for the beginner, but you're like, sorry, dude, you'll be glad this stuff's in here someday. And then for the advanced user, they're like, okay, yeah, all this stuff's in here, but I hate my life. This is like a boring experience, right? I don't think anyone's really thrilled with that compromise. And so what I want to do is tackle the beginner market. I don't care as much about the advanced feature thing, the like automation lanes and the boring sides of making music production. I think that taking an idea from your head to the speakers can be a lot more fun. There's a lot of different routes you could go to do that. Like you mentioned, a tracker, or you could use sort of voice to MIDI stuff, right, or whatever it is. But the reality is, for most people, is they can't, right? When you think about it, what tools are available, it's actually kind of limited. There aren't that many options. So I see it as a wide open space to create fun environments to get inspiration. And then with the idea of open format stuff, making this a place that you could move in and out of, hopefully somewhat effortlessly, right? So if you wanted to take your idea to Ableton Live, hopefully that would be viable as well. And so that's a challenge as well. But I see that as being kind of the utopian solution, really, the more that like things are a little more portable. And of course, I made Serum selfishly as well. I made like Serum 2 already represents approaching like something that I can make music inside and be relatively like happy the whole time and not being too angry with the software. So I'm getting there. I've had some experiences making something that resembles music in a Serum preset, and like the whole time realized the whole time I didn't get too frustrated, and that's a great feeling, because in general I'm just a cranky user of computers. I'm just one of those people. It's like, come on, work.
Yeah, I appreciate that Serum has an open wavetable format, and I appreciate that the multi-samplers are in SFC. Would you ever consider open sourcing any aspect of your software code, or do you think that's too risky in a piracy-prone market?
Piracy is not really a thought there. I mean, I think that there's primarily, well, first and foremost, there's a legal issue of can I, right? Like, can I even open source my software? At this point, I kind of can't. But
Just because of libraries and stuff like that you're using?
yeah, I have licensed code that's not mine. And that's been the case in Serum 1 as well. I had code from Andrew Simper, had code from Ohmforce. It was Laurent Desoras's white paper code, which was open, but he modified it. I could have gotten permission from Laurent. I don't know if Andrew wanted those filters open sourced or not. And I didn't approach him about that. And then there was the VST SDK itself. Technically, you cannot open source a VST plugin because you're using Steinberg's VST SDK, which requires a license agreement. So technically, any open source plugin will not actually have the VST code with it. It'll have like a template folder for here's where you stick the VST SDK. But the way that I wrote things is I was always pretty like intertwined with the SDK, and it's just like, well, man, if I wanted to open source this, whatever, one of the little freeware plugins say, it's like, man, I'd have to spend a few days just like separating out the VST SDK so that I can just say, here you guys go. And then there's the other issue with my code's just really messy and ugly, and so it's sort of like, I don't know if you've had those thoughts, but it's sort of like, oh, maybe I should share this project file. Then you're like, no, it's too sloppy, man. I don't want people to know. And so
yeah, if I do share a project file, I definitely usually clean it up a lot beforehand.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe I'm just lazy and don't want to do that. But yeah, I don't know how much benefit there would be at this point to much of that. I do think about opening up the Serum preset format, which is something that I'd like to do at some point in the future. So that if someone wanted to make a utility to try to convert some synth presets into Serum or vice versa, that they would have more access to being able to attempt that, or like AI generate presets and stuff like that, which I personally am a little opposed to, but I don't really want to stop people from trying. So right now, Serum presets, when I say Serum preset, I mean Serum 2 preset, they're JSON format, but it's like JSON compressed, so it's not human readable. And we do that not only to save disk space, but also it actually loads a lot faster, so it's more performant. But in theory, we could have an option that you could save as with it uncompressed. And then at that point, you're left with, like you have with Ableton Live, you have this sort of human readable file describing everything that's been moved off of its default value. And that can be kind of interesting. It would take a lot of work for someone, but in theory, someone could make, Python scripts or whatever it is that could generate presets from scratch or whatever it is they'd want to imagine. But we have to sort of provide them with that and documentation first. So, It's not a priority. Probably Serum 2.1 or 2.5, though. I would like to open that up to people.
Yeah, I could see AI being really interesting there. If you give an AI like a bunch of JSONs, or I guess just one that's like the default values, and then you give it like, I don't know, a couple of hundred that are not the default values, that are good known presets that you're like, these sound good. This is what the default is. Make me a bunch of presets that are not the default, that are somewhere between all of these other JSONs that are known good presets, and just generate me presets and see if it can do it. That'd be kind of cool. AI generated presets.
Yeah, it could be good. We've improved the hybridize a little bit in Serum 2. In fact, really recently, it got another round of improving on it. And so the hybridize basically does sort of a Mr. Potato Head type of combination of presets. So it'll like load the main oscillators, and then it'll lock them so that there's a lock feature, and then the locking prevents them from changing their settings. So it loads the main oscillators from a random preset, locks that, then it loads again, and then it locks the effects rack, and then it loads again, locks the envelopes and LFOs and stuff, right? And so then you end up with this preset that's hybridization, or just using bits of different presets. And what's interesting is you actually get pretty amazing results when you, or you can, when you zero in on a certain, sort of like with AI, you just need enough training data. This is sort of a similar situation, right? It's just like you just need enough source material to combine to get interesting combinations out. But like with Serum, if you filter to like bell or lead or 808 bass or whatever it is, and then you just hit the number 8 key, it's hybridize. Like I'm about 1 in 3 sounds pretty decent to me. And then like 1 in 10 will be like, oh my God, that's actually cooler than the source presets. And I go back to the source presets and I'm like, yep, I like this better than any individual one. Just the combination of these effects with those oscillators actually sounds really great. So that's kind of amusing as well. But as you probably know, a true random, if you just made a preset random, it just sounds like garbage, right? You just have long envelopes and like out of key, and so you really need to constrain stuff down. AI is definitely a tempting way to look at it, but it really does come down to your training data. And there's a whole bunch of places that I'd be tempted to look into employing AI. Audio to preset would be another one, like Magnus did with SynPlant 2. And then audio to score makes some sense now that we have a score system in there. And then you could combine the two in theory, right? And you could go music to preset, which would be a little insane, but you'd have to go, audio to score and then score to try to realize those as it's a little bonkers, but then there's similar sounds search stuff, right? Which a bunch of people are doing now, like Ableton things that would be useful to have someday. Yeah, and then this AI generative hybrid stuff, and then there's actual audio gen, right? Like generative AI audio. So type in rainstorm and have it make you a sample of rainstorm. And so those, I've always felt like that stuff's not quite there yet, in the sense of you need a lot of good training data, and all of those examples seem like they're not quite satisfactory to me yet. But the concept's exciting. I love the idea that you could type in laughter and get some laughter sample that no one else has and use that on your record. And it's like, great, so that's something I'll consider for the future too. And then there's some others as well, some other AI use cases that I can't think of at the moment. But yeah, so there's a whole handful. But none of them excite me that much compared to some of the stuff we have on the backlog that I probably won't talk about. But yeah, there's a lot that we want to do, and we're not short on ideas. But cart before the horse stuff, we're definitely still. I'm mentally still zeroed in on Serum 2 and the Serum 2.0 installer specifically, and just having that monolith be as good as possible.
Have you ever coded a plugin that you thought was just too weird or too niche and never finished it, or finished it and never released it?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. Yeah, I mean, I also released some that were too weird and too niche, and I probably shouldn't have. Like, just random things I'd sit and make in an afternoon or less, like a MIDI shift delay. Oh, it's 4 MIDI delays that cascade together, each with a transpose knob, and like, I don't know why anyone would. I'm just wasting people's time downloading something like that. But I made so when Magnus, again, Sonic Charge, Magnus is a friend of mine. He made BitSpeak. I thought that was, oh no, it was before BitSpeak. So in fact, I might have, I don't think I was responsible for him doing BitSpeak, but I was very inspired by his microtonic drum synth Easter egg, which I don't know if you've ever come across, but so Microtonic's a great little drum synth, really clever. There's a lot about it that's very genius. And I'm not a big drum synth user, but it's actually as good as they come, I think. Anyway, Microtonic has an Easter egg where if you let the splash screen, it may have changed over the years, but it had this Easter egg where if you let the splash screen sit for a minute, it would then start speaking, and it would say, "I would now like to play you a little tune," and then the drum synth became this like avant-garde music generator, where he basically set up some algorithmic composition basically that's using the drum synth parameters, but setting all the envelopes like unrealistically long, like longer than you can actually do using the drum synth. So, okay, this will fade in for 30 seconds with an LFO on it. And then, so you hear these like tones drifting in and out, and it's just like super avant-garde sounding. But anyway, I was really excited by the voice. I was like, dude, how is it talking? And he was like, oh, it's he's like, that's my voice. Actually, it's a codec that I use to compress it down to be like 4K or something. And so then he told me about the vocal compression codec stuff, because I was like, it has such an interesting sound to it. So I made a plugin that was basically BitSpeak, the same idea, like taking in the vocal compression codec. And yeah, except my plugin was just basically abusing all of the registers, right? Because you had like 7 or 8, like, I can't even remember now, but you had these different registers of how it's dealing with data. Like, it's like data streaming, and you have these streams that represent like control parameters, like voice pitch and whatever. And so I was just overriding those and hacking them with knobs that you could automate. And so this thing sounded like a broken speak and spell kind of a thing, but it would also output like just the most insanely loud, terrible sounds. And like, it wouldn't crash, but it would produce silence a lot of the time, a good majority of the time. It's just one of those like really frustrating things. So it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna like share this. So yeah, I have a handful of little experiment things like that. Nothing. I'm definitely not sitting on anything great. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, I have some little weapon. Not at all. I have some, but not mine. They're other people's.
What's a piece of like music or technical coding advice or something that you see in the producer or developer communities a lot that you see espoused a lot, but you completely disagree with, if any?
Oh, just hype, man. Just snake oil hype shit. It's so tiring, and I think it's gotten better, but you just saw all these guys, with their distortion plugins or whatever it is. And I'm not going to name names because I actually don't even think of a name. And I don't think it's not like EDM artists or whatever. I don't even know who, but you just see people coming out with like plugins for sale that just, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm like being hypocritical or something, but some of it feels just like slang in product, if you know what I mean. Like, it's like, dude, nobody needs this distortion. There's nothing special in this distortion. That everybody's host has a tan H distortion in it, but you've like tried to make it all sound like it's doing something that more than it is, or something like that. And like Sausage Fattener is an example, except that was like actually did sound it did have a bit of a sound to it. Whether or not that was intended, I'm not sure. Because it was a little compressor and distortion. But that's sort of a thing. I think Sausage Fattener triggered like people to make things sort of like that, like these sort of novelty plugs and stuff like that. And that kind of starts to bother me because whatever, people are free to make whatever they want to make, and people are free to buy whatever they want to buy. But you saw it really in the pro audio world with the snake oil, with the, sim analog hardware type plug-in stuff, and people getting, people selling very expensive plugins that weren't really doing a lot under the hood ultimately, and kind of trying to fool people by the look of the thing. So that's the only thing I think I really disapprove of. Marketing in general is a little tiring, and I don't do any of that. I don't advertise. I don't do any marketing. I don't have any social media, and I take some pride in that. I can't. Maybe everyone else does too. I wouldn't know because I'm not on social media. But last I was on there, everyone was on there advertising their stuff, and just like, and like that kind of bothers me too, because it's like, put your money and your time into your product. And then I feel the same way for musicians, right? I'm so exhausted, and I'm not on social media, and just thinking about it exhausts me. Thinking of musicians spending a lot of effort trying to make viral posts and content and stuff. And it's just like, man, it's just put your time into the music. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it maybe like, I'm not going to say that that's good advice, or it might be terrible advice, but I actually kind of think it's good advice, is that having no image is probably better than like wasting your time making skits or something.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think putting the time into the actual thing versus selling the thing is generally better. Though if you can do both, I think, that's really you spend all the time on the thing and then have somebody else who spends all their time on trying to sell the thing. There is some people in the world who just love marketing, which is kind of crazy.
That with like, and maybe I could ask your opinion on this. So like for Serum 2, I was planning to do nothing, like just put it up on the website. It's a free update, put it up there. I know that, that social media will help let people be aware of the fact that it's there for them and stuff like that. But then I also thought maybe I should either tease or similarly make some little hype video that like just starts overwhelming people with how much shit is actually in Serum 2, because I'm sure you've probably noticed there's a lot in there when you add it up. If you're like, what's new? And you're like, oh, actually there's quite a lot in here. So
I think that would be cool to make a video of like what's new in Serum 2. Also, the fact that it's a free update is insane to me. What was it that made you make that decision? Like you could have easily sold it for another $100 and made a ton of money. So why did you decide to not?
Yeah, so it's a tough one, and I'm probably making a huge like financial mistake, and I think it's like it's very philosophical. I think that I have tried to operate in the sort of the Gandhi like principle of be the change you want to see in the world, or treat others the way that you want to be treated, right? So it's like me really being my customer and knowing how it feels, because I've been there. I've been the customer of so much software, and I know how it feels when people try to rope me for an update.
But this update is like, huge. It's like a whole new synth, basically.
Sure, but hear me out. Like maybe it's Ableton 9 comes out and they added like a bunch of new things, but the one thing I want is like automation curves, and they're asking me for $150 or something. And then it's like, man, I gave you guys $400 last year. Like, do I really want automation curve? Maybe I don't want to. Maybe I'll just stick with Live 8. You know what I mean? And so like I hate that thought. I hate the thought of a kid who saved up to buy Serum feeling like I'm grinding him, and he has to decide whether or not to upgrade or just like keep using the old one, which of course I'm not going to keep updating. So that's there's that sort of a thing. People have asked if updates are free, and I have said updates are free for life. So I do feel like it would be a little disingenuous to charge. But I have spent millions of dollars and 5-6 years now on Serum 2. I've recorded hundreds of instruments, and you name it. I've done a lot of stuff. So it would be justifiable to charge. However, I don't need the money. Like, I could have retired, but I took that retirement money, and instead of retiring with it, I built Serum 2. So I'm doing it kind of a doubly stupid thing, you could say, right? Like, I'm not only not charging, but I also spent the money that I had to build it. I'm kicking the can down the road because I'm confident, and I could be wrong, but I'm confident that the next 5 years will be as good as the last 5 years for sales. And if that happens to be the case, then I'm glad I did all this, because it will just mean that, like, I did a, I did a thank you to everyone who supported me by buying Serum, which is really sort of a big core impetus of all this, is that I can't retire. Like, I like morally could not just close shop and retire. I have to support the customers who have gotten me this far. So because of that, this feels like very logical and natural to me. And I am hoping that people notice that it's a little nice and all, but I'm also in a way more hoping that it puts a little pressure on other companies to also be nice, because I don't think that music software, I don't like things being like a racket or a hustle. I don't like people getting kind of milked or scammed, right? And it's just like, I like things being honest transactions. And I think that I feel like things started getting a little dishonest in the world with social media or something. Like, things just started becoming a little bit false, and that it started to seem like it's okay to act immorally or something. I don't know. I had to quit all of social media. I was like, the world's going fucking crazy with everyone getting programmed from this shit. So I've checked out, and I'm doing good. But I sense that other people sense that things. I mean, I'm still accessing the internet, so I can still get my programming and think that things are fucked. But yeah, I don't know. No, I'm really glad to be able to offer this thank you thing, because to me it just comes down to like, why do you do the things you do in life at all? And you're like, part of it ultimately is like, man, I just want to give people joy. I just hope my music gives people joy, or this or that. And it's the same with Serum. And so the thought that I know that downloading this and people going through the sounds and stuff will give them joy, that is like awesome to me. It makes like all of the animals I've eaten in my life or whatever less of an atrocity, I guess.
Yeah, it's very admirable. I think yeah, like you said, it's a crazy decision to make, but I think that yeah, I think from a philosophical standpoint, it is the right thing to do. But also, yeah, it is we do live in a society, and it is a risk for you. So it's admirable that you're taking that risk.
Yeah, thanks. I know I'll be all right. And I just I just don't think there's a stopping of the Serum train now. And I do think that there's a factor of that here as well, which is that if everyone who owns Serum, which is a lot of people, if they all upgrade to Serum 2 because it's free, now you have all of this user base on Serum 2, which means that for people making presets, Serum 2 is the place that they're going to want to make sounds. And so it does allow Serum to sort of retain a little bit of that Microsoft like dominance as sort of like the leading synth. And because I don't need sales to go up, man. I don't need them to even stay as good as they are. They can go down by quite a lot, and I'm still like just fine. So that's all it's ever been to me, is just to get by. Like, just get paid like a programmer is plenty to me. So because there's nothing ultimately that money is good for, and that it's the ability to get stuff done. You can impact people's lives with it, of course, and get altruistic and whatnot. And that's all I'll probably be doing from here on out, because I think I have my forever house now with some peace and quiet and some clean air, and that's awesome to have. Been wanting that for a while. And that's kind of and that's it. I have no material wants. So for me, at this point, like, getting into altruism doesn't even seem that exciting to me, because you're basically just trying to figure out like what organizations or people are going to allocate your money, or use your money in the most meaningful ways, and that becomes a job in of itself. And I still feel like I can do a lot to bring more kind of joy to the world through music technology. I still think that there's more to kind of reinvest in there. So that's my thinking moving forward. Still is not to retire or anything like that, and not get into altruism. So then it comes down to, well, the only revenue I really need is the revenue that's needed to sustain this stuff. And because I'm not growth oriented. I mean, it's very anti-capitalist the way I've approached Xfer, and it confuses a lot of folks. But yeah, I'm not looking to try to grow, not looking to try to grow, I guess you could say, right? Not trying to stratify into other markets or this or that or anything. It's just really serve music makers as good as possible. To me, is like the the mantra we had making Serum 2 the whole time. Well, there was two mantras really. One is Serum 2 has to be fucking awesome, which was Dave's mantra, and the other one was that we have to appease the music gods. And I think that that's something that like I took to heart, and we kind of took to heart, is that there's this concept of the quality of music that's made is based on the tools that are offered, and that by offering as good of tools as we can, we actually will be influencing the quality of music made. And there's no ego involved in that. It's just like to be able to empower people, to be able to offer them, better tools is like, I'm happy to be able to help, right? Kind of the thing is the way I see it. I don't take any ownership over their music or that influence, but just rather the empowerment. I'll take some ownership over, I guess. But yeah, that's really exciting to me, and it's really cool to have lined up with some like-minded individuals that were kind of on that same sort of wavelength of like doing this for music. It's a very meta way to look at it all, but it's such a healthier way to look at things than to look at, oh, this is going to make a lot of money, kind of the thing, which is maybe my false perception, but that's my perception of how most people approach business, because that's just like, it's almost like, sounds like that's the definition of business. Of course it's about making money. And I don't think things have to be that way, So if I influence through this as well, that would be a really huge way if other people decided, whether it's other companies following suit or other people in their day jobs or endeavors say, no, I think we can do it. I think we can focus on the product itself and not spend on the marketing or whatever. If I influence through that, and I think that's awesome, because I think this is the stuff that makes the world less shit,
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast again, man. It was awesome to chat.
Yes, sir.
When can people expect to see Serum 2, you think, roughly? Like, what's the rough ETA? Because this is being recorded on, what are we at, February 7? What's your like rough ETA on release, you think?
I don't have one, unfortunately. It's between next week and the middle of March, right? So somewhere between, it's between 1 and 5 weeks from now.
Okay, so soon.
Yeah.
This podcast, I think, will be out in maybe 2 or 3 weeks. So
okay,
by that
so
point,
hopefully Serum 2 is out by then. But if not, yeah, we're scrambling to get ready. Double, hopefully this podcast's out. I wouldn't want to build too much anticipation. I've kind of intentionally not teased stuff because I don't want the pressure myself, but I also don't like to wait for toys at Christmas, so I don't want to do that to other people.
Right.
But so hopefully it's out, but either way, doesn't really matter. But yeah, I think it will be just about the same time this airs then. Yeah, hopefully.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you, Bill. Have a good one.